The morning air on Kepler, 442b tasted like metal and dust as Jake Torres walked across the mining platform. His boots made soft clanging sounds on the metal walkway that stretched between the main facility and the sensor array. The twin suns were just rising over the red mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape that surrounded the isolated mining station. Jake had been alone on this rock for 8 months now. The company said they would send a replacement crew, but Jake knew better than to believe corporate promises. He was cheaper than a full team, and as long as the rare earth minerals kept flowing back to Earth, nobody cared if one mechanic was slowly going crazy from isolation. He reached the sensor maintenance panel and opened the metal cover with practiced ease. The diagnostic screen showed everything normal, all green lights across the board. The perimeter sensors were working fine, scanning a 50-kilometer radius around the station for any signs of trouble. Not that trouble ever came to this forgotten corner of space. Jake was about to close the panel when something caught his eye. A red blip appeared on the edge of the sensor range, then disappeared. He frowned and ran a diagnostic check. The sensors were working perfectly. He waited a few minutes, watching the screen carefully. Nothing. Probably just a meteor, Jake muttered to himself. He was used to talking out loud now. After 8 months of silence, his own voice was sometimes the only thing that kept him sane. But the red blip appeared again, this time closer. Jake leaned forward, studying the readings. The signature was too large for a meteor, and it was moving too slowly. Whatever it was, it had crashed about 30 kilometers to the south, in the deep canyon that cut through the desert. Jake stood there for a long moment, considering his options. Company protocol was clear about investigating anomalies. He was supposed to report anything unusual immediately and wait for instructions. But the nearest company ship was 3 weeks away, and Jake had learned not to bother the bosses unless something was actually threatening the mining operation. He made his decision quickly. Jake returned to the main facility and gathered his exploration gear: a portable scanner, emergency medical supplies, water, food for 2 days, and his trusty toolkit. If it was just space junk, he could salvage anything useful. If it was something more interesting, well, at least it would break the monotony. The journey to the crash site took 4 hours on his all-terrain rover. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in its own way. Red rocks jutted up from the desert floor like the bones of some ancient giant. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, but Jake's environmental suit kept him cool and comfortable. As he got closer to the canyon, Jake started to smell something strange. It was sweet and metallic at the same time, like flowers mixed with copper. The smell got stronger as he descended into the canyon on a winding path that his rover's navigation system had mapped out. When Jake finally reached the crash site, he stopped the rover and just stared. This was not space junk. This was not a meteor. This was something he had never seen before, something that should not exist. The crashed object looked like it had once been alive. It was organic, with smooth curves and what looked like scales covering its surface. But it also had mechanical elements, metal tubes and conduits that pulsed with faint light. The whole thing was about the size of a small spacecraft, maybe 40 meters long. Jake approached carefully, scanner in hand. The readings were bizarre. The object showed signs of both biological and technological activity. Parts of it were definitely alive, while other parts were clearly artificial. It was as if someone had built a machine out of living tissue. As Jake walked around the wreckage, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A low, pained sound that was unmistakably the cry of a wounded animal. He followed the sound to a section of the craft that had split open during the crash. Inside, Jake found something that would change his life forever. The creature was enormous, at least 12 feet from nose to tail. Its body was similar to the dragon from old Earth legends, but this was no myth. This was real, and it was dying. The creature's scales were pure white, almost translucent, like crystal or ice. Its wings were spread awkwardly beneath its body, clearly broken. Its eyes were closed, but Jake could see its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Jake had studied xenobiology in college, but he had never expected to encounter alien life like this. The creature was obviously intelligent. Jake could see tool marks on some of the wreckage around it, as if the creature had been trying to repair something before the crash. The most disturbing thing was that the creature's lower body appeared to be paralyzed. Its hind legs were twisted at unnatural angles, and there was no movement below its midsection. Jake could see dark fluid seeping from wounds along its spine. Jake stood there for several minutes, his mind racing. Protocol demanded that he report this immediately. First contact with intelligent alien life was the most important discovery in human history. But the creature was dying, and Jake was the only person who could help. He made his second life-changing decision of the day. Jake returned to his rover and gathered every piece of medical equipment he had brought. It was not much: basic first aid supplies, some emergency medications, and a portable life support unit that was designed for humans. But it was better than nothing. As Jake approached the creature again, its eyes suddenly opened. They were the most beautiful things Jake had ever seen. Large, intelligent, and the color of pale blue ice. The creature looked directly at him, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There was no mistaking the intelligence in those eyes. The creature made a soft sound, not quite a growl, and not quite a whistle. It was trying to communicate. Jake knelt down slowly, keeping his hands visible and moving carefully. He had no idea if the creature was dangerous, but something told him it was not going to hurt him. "Easy there," Jake said softly. "I'm here to help. I don't know what you are, but I can see you're hurt." The creature's eyes followed Jake's movements as he began to examine its injuries. The wounds were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. They were deep, but they seemed to be healing themselves slowly. The edges of the cuts were knitting together, but the process was clearly not working properly. Jake set up the portable life support unit and connected its sensors to various parts of the creature's body. The readings were confusing, but they showed that the creature was alive, and its vital signs were weak but stable. Jake gave it some water from his supply, and the creature drank gratefully. As Jake worked, he noticed something strange. Along the creature's spine, there were patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with its breathing. The patterns were complex and seemed almost like writing. They would glow brightly for a few seconds, then fade, then glow again in a slightly different configuration. "What are you trying to tell me?" Jake whispered. The creature made that soft sound again, and the patterns on its spine pulsed more rapidly. Jake had the distinct feeling that it was trying to answer his question. Jake spent the next hour doing what he could to stabilize the creature's condition. He cleaned its wounds, gave it more water, and adjusted the life support system to provide a steady flow of oxygen-enriched air. The creature seemed to understand that Jake was helping it, and it remained calm and cooperative throughout the process. But Jake knew that this was only temporary. The creature needed more help than he could provide with his limited supplies. It needed a proper medical facility, advanced equipment, and probably medications that did not exist on Earth. As the twin suns began to set over the canyon, Jake made his third and most important decision of the day. He was going to take the creature back to the mining station. He had no idea how he was going to move something that weighed probably 1,000 pounds, but he was going to find a way. The creature seemed to sense Jake's determination as he began to pack up his equipment. The patterns on its spine pulsed again, this time in what looked almost like a grateful expression. "Don't worry," Jake said. "I'm not leaving you here to die. We're going to figure this out together." The creature's eyes met his again, and Jake felt something pass between them. Trust, maybe, or recognition, or just a bond that forms between two beings who are both far from home and trying to survive. Jake did not know it yet, but he had just made the most important decision in the history of two species. The wounded creature lying in the canyon was not just any alien. It was a member of an ancient race that had been watching humanity for centuries, waiting to see if Earth's people could be trusted with the secrets of the galaxy. And Jake Torres, a lonely mechanic on a forgotten mining station, had just passed the first test. Moving the creature back to the mining station turned out to be the hardest thing Jake had ever done in his life. The all-terrain rover was not designed to carry a 12-foot alien dragon, even with the cargo trailer attached. Jake had to make 3 trips back to the station to gather enough equipment to build a makeshift transport system. He used industrial lifting cables, metal support beams, and every cushioning material he could find to create a sled that could be pulled behind his rover. The creature remained conscious throughout the entire process, watching Jake work with those intelligent ice-blue eyes. Every time Jake looked at it, he felt like the creature was studying him just as much as he was studying it. The journey back to the station took 8 hours. Jake had to drive slowly to avoid jarring the creature too much, and he stopped frequently to check on its condition. The portable life support system kept beeping warnings that the creature's vital signs were irregular, but Jake did not know enough about alien physiology to understand what the readings meant. By the time they reached the mining station, both suns had set, and the desert had become cold and dark. Jake's environmental suit was running low on power, and he was exhausted from the physical and emotional strain of the day. But the hardest part was still ahead of him. Getting the creature into the station's medical bay required every piece of mechanical equipment Jake had access to. He used the cargo lifts, the maintenance hoists, and even reprogrammed 2 of the mining robots to help carry the makeshift stretcher through the corridors. The creature never complained or resisted, even when the movement clearly caused it pain. The medical bay was designed for human emergencies, but it was the best Jake could do. He cleared out all the standard equipment and set up an area large enough for the creature to lie comfortably. The environmental controls were adjusted to provide clean air and a comfortable temperature. Jake even managed to rig up a feeding system using the station's water recycling equipment. Once the creature was settled, Jake finally had a chance to examine it properly under good lighting. What he saw both amazed and worried him. The creature's white scales were not just decorative. They seemed to be part of a complex sensory system. Each scale could change its transparency and emit different colors of light. When Jake touched one gently, it responded with a soft glow that spread outward in ripples. The creature's wings were definitely broken, but Jake could see that they were healing themselves. The bones were slowly realigning, and new tissue was growing to repair the damaged membranes. It was like watching time-lapse photography of natural healing, except it was happening in real time. But the paralysis was the most concerning problem. Jake used a medical scanner to examine the creature's spine and found something that made his stomach turn. There were metal objects embedded in the creature's nervous system, small devices that seemed to be interfering with the normal function of its spinal cord. Jake had seen similar devices before, back on Earth. They were neural inhibitors, used in experimental medicine to block nerve signals in patients with chronic pain. But these devices were far more advanced than anything humans had developed, and they seemed to be deliberately preventing the creature from moving its lower body. This changed everything. The creature had not been paralyzed by the crash. It had been paralyzed on purpose. Someone or something had put those devices in its spine to keep it from moving. Jake felt a surge of anger at the thought of anyone torturing such a magnificent being. Over the next few days, Jake fell into a routine of caring for the creature. He would check its vital signs every morning, clean its wounds, provide fresh water and food, and spend hours just talking to it. Jake had always been a talker when he was nervous, and having a captive audience seemed to help both of them. "I don't know what you eat normally," Jake said on the 3rd day, offering the creature some of the protein paste that made up most of his own diet. "But this stuff will keep you alive even if it tastes like cardboard." The creature sniffed the food carefully, then ate it with obvious reluctance. Jake laughed despite himself. "Yeah, I know. I've been eating that garbage for 8 months. You get used to it eventually." Jake found himself sharing more personal stories as the days went on. He told the creature about his life on Earth, about the engineering degree he had never been able to use properly, about the failed relationships and dead-end jobs that had led him to accept a position on this remote mining station. "The funny thing is," Jake said while adjusting the creature's bedding, "I came out here to get away from people. And now the first real conversation I've had in months is with someone who can't even talk back." But the creature could communicate. Jake realized it just did not use words. The patterns of light on its scales changed in response to Jake's voice and actions. When Jake spoke softly and moved carefully, the lights were gentle and warm. When he was frustrated or worried, the lights became more urgent and rapid. On the 4th day, Jake made a breakthrough. While cleaning a wound on the creature's front leg, he noticed that it was deliberately moving its claw in the sand that had spilled from Jake's boots. When Jake looked more closely, he saw that the creature had drawn a simple picture. It was crude but unmistakable. The creature had drawn 2 figures, one that looked like Jake, and one that looked like itself. Between them, it had drawn wavy lines that could only represent communication. "You're trying to talk to me," Jake whispered. "You understand what I'm saying, don't you?" The creature's eyes met his, and the patterns on its scales pulsed in what Jake was beginning to recognize as agreement. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He was not just caring for an injured animal. He was communicating with an intelligent being from another world. Jake spent the rest of the day experimenting with different ways to communicate. He drew simple pictures in the sand and watched as the creature responded with its own drawings. It was slow and frustrating, but gradually Jake began to understand some basic concepts. The creature drew pictures of stars and spacecraft, suggesting that it had traveled between worlds. It drew pictures of others like itself, indicating that it was not the only one of its kind. And most disturbing of all, it drew pictures of smaller figures that seemed to be capturing and controlling the larger dragon-like beings. "Someone was holding you prisoner," Jake said, studying the crude drawings. "Those metal things in your spine, they put them there to keep you from fighting back." The creature's response was immediate and intense. The light patterns on its scales flashed angry red and violet, and it made a low sound that was unmistakably a growl of rage. But the anger was not directed at Jake. It was directed at whoever had heard it. Jake spent that night staring at the ceiling of his quarters, thinking about what he had learned. The creature was not just intelligent. It was a victim. Someone had been using advanced technology to enslave what might be an entire species of these magnificent beings. And somehow, this one had escaped. The next morning brought a new complication. Jake's communication system chimed with an incoming message from corporate headquarters. Jake's supervisor, a bureaucrat named Wilson who had never left Earth, appeared on the screen with his usual expression of bored annoyance. "Torres, your daily reports have been getting shorter and shorter. Corporate wants to know if you're having equipment problems or if you're just getting lazy out there." Jake forced himself to smile. "No problems, sir. Everything is running smoothly. The mining equipment is operating at peak efficiency, and the mineral shipments are on schedule." "Good, because we're thinking about sending an inspection team out there in a few weeks. Make sure everything is up to standard." The connection ended, leaving Jake staring at the blank screen. An inspection team would discover the creature immediately, and Jake had no doubt about what would happen then. Corporate would see the alien as either a valuable research specimen or a potential threat. Either way, the creature would disappear into some government facility, and Jake would probably disappear with it. Jake returned to the medical bay to find the creature, watching him with obvious concern. Somehow, it seemed to sense that something was wrong. "We might have a problem," Jake told it. "My bosses want to send people out here to check on things. If they find you, they're going to take you away." The creature's response surprised him. Instead of fear or anger, the light patterns on its scales took on what Jake had learned to recognize as determination. The creature began drawing the sand again, this time creating a more complex picture. It drew itself, but not as it appeared now, broken and paralyzed. In this drawing, the creature was whole and strong, with its wings spread wide and its body in a powerful stance. Below that, it drew the metal objects that were embedded in its spine, but in this picture, they were outside its body. "You want me to remove those things?" Jake said. "You think that will heal you?" The creature nodded, an almost human gesture that somehow it had learned from watching Jake. But then it drew something else that made Jake's blood run cold. It drew a picture of itself transforming, changing from the dragon-like form into something else. Something that looked suspiciously like a spacecraft. Jake sat back on his heels, staring at the drawings. If he was interpreting this correctly, the creature was not just intelligent. It was also capable of shape-shifting, and it was asking Jake to perform surgery to remove devices that were embedded in its nervous system. "I'm not a doctor," Jake said. "I fix machines, not living beings. If I make a mistake, I could kill you." But even as he said it, Jake knew he was going to try. The creature had trusted him enough to ask for help, and Jake could not bear the thought of letting it down. More than that, he was beginning to understand that this was about more than just one injured alien. This was about justice for an entire species that had been enslaved and tortured. Jake spent the rest of the day studying the medical equipment and trying to figure out how to safely remove the neural inhibitors. It was going to be the most dangerous thing he had ever attempted, but he was determined to find a way. The creature deserved to be free, and Jake was the only person in the galaxy who could make that happen. Jake spent 3 sleepless nights studying every piece of medical information in the station's database. The mining facility had basic surgical equipment for emergency procedures, but nothing designed for the delicate work of removing devices from an alien nervous system. Jake would have to modify his mechanical tools and hope that his engineering skills could translate to biological systems. The creature seemed to understand the complexity of what Jake was attempting. Each morning when Jake entered the medical bay, he found new drawings scratched into the sand. The creature was trying to show him the exact location of each neural inhibitor and how they connected to its spinal cord. The drawings were remarkably detailed, showing cross-sections and angles that would make the surgery possible. "You're helping me figure out how to save you," Jake said, studying the latest set of diagrams. "That takes a lot of trust." The creature's scales glowed with warm golden light, and it made a soft trilling sound that Jake had learned meant agreement or affection. Over the past week, Jake had begun to think of the creature as Frost, partly because of its white coloring and partly because of the cool, calming presence it brought to the sterile medical bay. On the 4th day, Jake made a discovery that changed everything he thought he knew about the situation. While cleaning Frost's wounds, he noticed something strange about the scars on its back legs. They were too neat, too precise to be accidental injuries. When Jake looked closer, he realized they were deliberate cuts, made with surgical precision. Jake used the medical scanner to examine the scars more carefully. What he found made his stomach turn. The scars were covering small insertion points where additional devices had been implanted and later removed. Someone had been using Frost as a test subject for multiple experiments. "They didn't just paralyze you," Jake whispered. "They were studying you, learning how your body works." Frost's response was immediate and heartbreaking. The creature's entire body began to glow with pulsing red light, and it made a sound that was part roar and part sob. Jake had never heard such raw pain and anger from any living being. Jake spent the next hour just sitting with Frost, talking softly and letting the creature express its emotions. The light patterns shifted from angry red to deep purple to pale blue as Frost worked through whatever memories Jake's discovery had triggered. "I'm going to get those things out of you," Jake promised. "I don't care how dangerous it is. Nobody should have to live like this." That afternoon, Jake received another communication from corporate headquarters. This time it was not his usual supervisor, but someone higher up the chain of command. Director Hayes appeared on the screen, a sharp-faced woman with cold eyes and an expensive suit. "Mr. Torres, we've been reviewing your recent reports, and we've noticed some irregularities in your power consumption and supply usage. Can you explain why you're using twice as much medical supplies as normal?" Jake kept his expression neutral. "I had a minor accident last week while working on the mining equipment. Cut myself pretty badly and had to use extra supplies to treat the wound." Hayes studied him through the screen. "Our records show you haven't filed an injury report. It wasn't serious enough to require a report, just a deep cut that needed careful cleaning and bandaging." "I see. Well, we've decided to move up the inspection schedule. A team will arrive in 1 week to conduct a full review of your operation. Make sure everything is in perfect order." The connection ended, leaving Jake staring at his reflection in the blank screen. 1 week. He had 1 week to either remove the neural inhibitors and help Frost escape, or find some way to hide a 12-foot alien dragon from a corporate inspection team. Jake returned to the medical bay to find Frost waiting for him with a new set of drawings. This time, the pictures were more complex than anything the creature had created before. Frost had drawn what looked like a star map, showing the position of various planets and the routes between them. In the center of the map, Frost had drawn a planet that looked remarkably like Earth. Around it, the creature had drawn dozens of small symbols that looked like spacecraft. But these were not ordinary ships. They looked organic, like living creatures flying through space. "This is your home system," Jake said, studying the drawings. "And these ships, they're your people, aren't they? Your species can transform into spacecraft." Frost nodded and began drawing again. This time it showed the process of transformation, with dragon-like creatures changing their shape and form until they became sleek, organic-looking ships capable of traveling between stars. Jake sat back, trying to process what he was learning. Frost species were not just intelligent aliens. They were living spacecraft, capable of interstellar travel without any mechanical technology. No wonder someone wanted to capture and control them. They've been hunting your people, Jake said, using them as ships. Frost's next drawing confirmed Jake's worst fears. The creature drew pictures of its people being captured, restrained, and fitted with the same kind of neural inhibitors that were currently embedded in Frost's spine. The enslaved dragons were then used as living ships, controlled by their captors like biological machines. The final drawing showed something that made Jake's blood run cold. It was a picture of Earth, but this time it was surrounded by dozens of the organic ships. But these ships were not free. They had small figures inside them, controlling them. Someone was building a fleet of enslaved dragon ships, and Earth seemed to be their base of operations. That's why you were coming to Earth, Jake realized. You were trying to warn us. Frost drew one more picture. This one showed Jake and Frost together, with Frost in its ship form and Jake somehow connected to it. Around them were other dragon ships, but these ones were free, glowing with the same warm light that Frost showed when it was happy. You want me to help you get back to your people, Jake said, to tell them about the slavers and help them fight back. Frost nodded again, and the patterns on its scales pulsed with urgent golden light. Time was running out, and they both knew it. Jake spent the rest of the day preparing for the surgery. He sterilized every tool he would need and set up the medical bay like an operating room. The procedure would be incredibly dangerous. One wrong move could sever Frost's spinal cord permanently or trigger a massive infection that would kill the creature within hours. But the alternative was worse. If the corporate inspection team found Frost, the creature would disappear into some secret facility where it would become just another test subject. Jake had seen enough of Frost's drawings to know what that meant. Endless experiments, torture disguised as research, and eventual death from the trauma of captivity. The night before the surgery, Jake sat with Frost in the medical bay, both of them knowing that tomorrow would change everything. Jake told Frost about his childhood on Earth, about the books he had read about dragons and heroes, about his dreams of exploring space and discovering new worlds. I never thought I'd actually meet a real dragon, Jake said, and I definitely never thought I'd become friends with one. Frost responded by placing one of his large claws gently on Jake's hand. The creature's scales glowed with soft blue light, and Jake felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a warmth of genuine friendship, of trust between two beings who had found each other in the vast loneliness of space. Jake had rigged up a communication system using the station's computer and some sensors attached to Frost's scales. It was crude, but allowed them to have more complex conversations by translating Frost's light patterns into simple words and symbols on a screen. Are you afraid? Jake asked. The word no appeared on the screen, followed by trust Jake. I'm afraid, Jake admitted. I'm afraid I'll hurt you. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. Jake, good, appeared on the screen. Jake helped Frost. Frost helped Jake. They spent the night making final preparations. Jake reviewed the procedure one more time, checking and double-checking every detail. Frost drew additional diagrams showing the exact depth and angle needed to reach each neural inhibitor without damaging the surrounding tissue. As the twin suns began to rise over the desert, Jake knew it was time. The surgery would take several hours, and he needed to be finished and have Frost recover before the corporate inspection team arrived. Are you ready? Jake asked. Ready, appeared on the screen. Then, after a pause, thank you, Jake. Jake began the procedure by administering a local anesthetic that he hoped would work on Frost's alien physiology. The creature's vital signs remained stable, and the light patterns on its scales indicated that the pain was manageable. The first neural inhibitor was located near the base of Frost's skull. Jake made a careful incision and used modified mechanical tools to probe the surrounding tissue. The device was small but complex, with multiple connections to Frost's nervous system. Jake worked slowly and carefully, using every bit of his mechanical training to understand how the device functioned. It was clearly alien technology, far more advanced than anything humans had developed. But the basic principles were similar to the electronic systems Jake worked with every day. After 2 hours of delicate work, Jake successfully removed the first inhibitor. Frost's response was immediate. The creature's tail twitched for the first time since Jake had found it in the canyon. "It's working," Jake whispered. "I can actually do this." But the hardest part was still ahead. The remaining inhibitors were deeper in Frost's spine, surrounded by critical nerve clusters that controlled the creature's ability to transform. One mistake here could leave Frost permanently disabled, unable to take its ship form and return to its people. Jake took a deep breath and continued working, knowing that the fate of 2 entire species might depend on the steadiness of his hands. The second neural inhibitor was buried deep in Frost's spinal column, surrounded by nerve clusters that glowed with faint bioelectrical energy. Jake could see the device through the modified scanner he had rigged up, but reaching it would require cutting through tissue that controlled Frost's most basic functions. Jake's hands were steady as he made the incision, but sweat was dripping down his face inside his helmet. The modified surgical tools felt clumsy in his fingers, designed for repair machines rather than living beings. But Frost remained calm throughout the procedure, its scales glowing with soft encouragement whenever Jake paused to check his condition. "Almost there," Jake whispered, using a micro cutter to separate the neural inhibitor from the surrounding tissue. "Just hold on a little longer." The device came free with a small pop, and immediately Jake saw Frost's hind legs twitch. The creature made a sound that was part relief and part joy, and the patterns on its scales shifted to bright gold and silver. But as Jake moved to remove the third and final inhibitor, something went wrong. The device was not just embedded in Frost's spine. It was fused with the nerve tissue, grown into the creature's body like a parasite. Jake realized with growing horror that removing it might be impossible without killing Frost. "This one's different," Jake said, studying the scanner readings. "It's been in there longer. It's become part of you." The word "remove" appeared on the communication screen, followed by "must remove." "I don't know if I can do it without damaging your spinal cord permanently," Jake said. "You could die. Choose freedom," appeared on the screen. "Choose death over slavery." Jake stared at the message for a long moment, understanding the courage it must have taken for Frost to type those words. The creature would rather die than remain paralyzed and helpless. Jake began the most delicate operation of his life. He used hair-thin cutting tools to separate the neural inhibitor from Frost's nervous system, working molecule by molecule to avoid damaging the surrounding tissue. It took 3 hours of painstaking work, with Jake stopping frequently to let Frost rest and recover from the trauma. When the final device came free, Frost's entire body convulsed with bioelectrical energy. Jake was thrown backward as arcs of light coursed through the creature's scales, and every piece of electronic equipment in the medical bay overloaded and shut down. Jake's vision was filled with white spots, and his ears were ringing from the electrical discharge. When his sight cleared, he found himself lying against the far wall of the medical bay, his tools scattered around him. The room smelled like ozone and burn metal, but Frost was moving. For the first time since Jake had found in the canyon, the creature was able to lift his entire body off the floor. Its legs were shaky and weak, but they were working. Frost struggled to stand, nearly falling several times, but determination kept it upright. "You did it," Jake said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You're free." Frost turned to look at Jake, and there was something different in its ice-blue eyes. The pain and helplessness were gone, replaced by a fierce intelligence and growing strength. The creature took several tentative steps, then moved with increasing confidence as its body remembered how to function properly. But their celebration was interrupted by the sound Jake had been dreading for days. The mining station's proximity alarm was beeping, indicating that a spacecraft was approaching. Jake checked his chronometer and felt his stomach drop. The corporate inspection team was arriving 2 days early. "We're out of time," Jake said, activating the communication system. "They're here. Transform now. Appear on the screen. Show Jake truth." Jake was about to ask what Frost meant when the creature began to change. It started slowly, with Frost's scales shifting from white to a metallic silver color. Then the creature's body began to elongate and reshape itself, bones and muscles flowing like liquid as they took on new configurations. Jake watched in amazed terror as Frost transformed from a dragon-like creature into something that looked like a living spacecraft. The creature's wings became sleek hull sections, its legs folded into landing struts, and its head elongated into a streamlined nose cone. The whole transformation took less than 5 minutes, leaving Jake staring at a 30-foot organic ship that pulsed with internal light. A section of the ship's hull opened, revealing an interior that looked like a combination of cockpit and living tissue. Soft bioluminescent panels provided light, and Jake could see control surfaces that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured. "Get in" appeared on a screen that formed from what used to be frost scales. "Must leave now." Jake could hear voices in the corridor outside the medical bay. The inspection team had docked with the mining station and was beginning their search. Jake had perhaps minutes before they reached the medical bay. Jake grabbed his emergency kit and ran toward Frost's transformed body. As he climbed into the organic cockpit, he felt the ship's hull closing around him. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, like being embraced by something warm and alive. The interior of the ship was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. There were no traditional controls or displays, just organic surfaces that seemed to respond to his thoughts and touch. When Jake placed his hands on what looked like control panels, he felt a strange tingling sensation as neural connections formed between his nervous system and the ship's biological computer. "How do I fly this thing?" Jake asked. "Think fly" appeared on a display screen. Frost and Jake fly together. Jake could hear the inspection team getting closer. Their voices were loud and authoritative as they searched the station room by room. Jake knew they would reach the medical bay within minutes. "We need to get out of here now," Jake said. The ship began to move, lifting off the floor of the medical bay with silent grace. Jake felt no sensation of acceleration or movement, even though he could see through the ship's organic viewports that they were rising toward the ceiling. But the medical bay's ceiling was solid metal, and Jake realized with growing panic that they were trapped. The ship was too large to fit through the station's airlocks, and punching through the hull would cause explosive decompression that would kill everyone on the station. "Frost, we can't get out this way," Jake said. "The ceiling is too thick." "Trust Frost" appeared on the screen. The ship's surface began to glow with increasing intensity, and Jake felt a strange vibration through the hull. The air around them shimmered with heat distortion, and Jake realized that Frost was generating some kind of energy field. The metal ceiling above them began to glow red-hot, then white-hot, and finally simply vanished as Frost's energy field converted the solid matter into superheated plasma. The ship rose through the hole, emerging into thin atmosphere above the mining station. Jake looked down to the viewport and saw the inspection team running to the corridors below, their equipment detecting the massive energy discharge that had just occurred. But they were too late. Frost had already carried Jake beyond their reach. "That was incredible," Jake said. "How did you do that?" "Frost's living ship" appeared on the screen. "Can create energy from matter. Convert solid to plasma." Jake was beginning to understand the true capabilities of Frost species. They were not just intelligent aliens who could transform into spacecraft. They were living fusion reactors, capable of converting matter directly into energy. No wonder someone wanted to enslave them as ships. As they rose into orbit around the planet, Jake got his first clear view of the corporate inspection vessel. It was a standard company ship, armed but not heavily militarized. More concerning were the other ships that Jake could see on the scanner. Sleek, organic vessels that looked similar to Frost but moved with the mechanical precision of control craft. "Those are your people," Jake said. "The ones who've been enslaved." "Yes," appeared on the screen. "They hunt Frost. Hunt Jake now, too." 3 of the enslaved dragon ships were moving to intercept them, their movements coordinated by whatever control system their captors were using. Jake could see weapon ports opening along their hulls, and he realized that the slavers were prepared to destroy Frost rather than let it escape. "Can we outrun them?" Jake asked. "Frost, weak from surgery," appeared on the screen. "Cannot run far. Then we fight," Jake said, surprised by his own words. A week ago, he had been a lonely mechanic fixing mining equipment. Now he was preparing for space combat with an alien dragon that had become his closest friend. "Jake, sure?" appeared on the screen. "I'm sure," Jake said. "You trusted me to free you. Now I trust you to get us out of this." Jake felt the ship's systems responding to his determination. Neural connections that had been tentative before became stronger, and suddenly Jake could feel Frost's thoughts and emotions as if they were his own. The sensation was overwhelming at first, but gradually Jake learned to distinguish between his own consciousness and Frost's alien mind. Through their shared connection, Jake could sense Frost's gratitude, courage, and fierce protective instincts. But he could also sense something else, a deep sadness for the enslaved members of its species who were now moving to attack them. "They're not evil," Jake realized. "They're victims just like you were. Must free them," appeared on the screen. "Must break control systems." The first enslaved dragon ship opened fire, sending bolts of plasma energy toward them. But Frost was no longer the wounded, paralyzed creature Jake had found in the canyon. Free of the neural inhibitors, Frost moved through space with liquid grace, dodging the attacks while returning fire with precision shots designed to disable rather than destroy. Jake found himself thinking tactically, his mind merging with Frost as they worked together to outmaneuver their attackers. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, the perfect coordination between human creativity and alien intuition. "I can see their control systems," Jake said, the words coming from knowledge he somehow shared with Frost. "If we can get close enough, we can disrupt the neural inhibitors remotely." "Dangerous," appeared on the screen. "Must touch them directly." Jake understood. To free the enslaved dragons, Frost would have to make physical contact with each ship and use its bioelectrical abilities to overload their control systems. It would mean flying directly into weapons range of creatures who had no choice but to try to kill them. "Let's do it," Jake said. "Let's free your people." The first enslaved dragon ship came at them like a missile. Its organic hull glowed with the same bioelectrical energy that Frost possessed. But Jake could sense the difference through their neural connection. This creature's movements were mechanical and lifeless, controlled by the neural inhibitors embedded in its spine. "It's trying to ram us," Jake said, watching the approaching ship through their shared senses. Frost responded by diving toward the planet's surface, using the gravitational field to increase their speed while the attacking ship struggled to match their maneuver. Jake felt Frost's pain as it watched his enslaved cousin fire weapons that had been grown from its own body. "Can you really free them?" Jake asked. "Must try," appeared on the screen. "Cannot leave family in chains." Through their connection, Jake understood that Frost's species lived in close-knit groups that shared emotional and mental bonds similar to what Jake was now experiencing. Leaving the enslaved dragons would be like abandoning his own brothers and sisters. Frost suddenly changed direction, accelerating toward the nearest enslaved ship with reckless speed. Jake felt his stomach lurch as they approached the other vessel, but he forced himself to trust Frost's abilities. At the last possible moment, Frost extended what looked like tendrils from his hull, organic appendages that Jake realized were similar to the neural connections he was experiencing. The tendrils made contact with the enslaved ship's surface, and immediately Jake felt a new presence in their shared consciousness. It was like hearing a scream of pain and rage that had been bottled up for years. The enslaved dragon was fully aware of what was happening to it, but had been powerless to resist the control systems forced into its body. Through Frost's connection, Jake could feel the creature's desperate desire for freedom. Frost channeled bioelectrical energy through the neural tendrils, targeting control systems that kept the other dragon enslaved. Jake watched in amazement as the enslaved ship's movements became less mechanical and more fluid. The creature was fighting back against its captors, but the process was taking too long. The other two enslaved ships were closing in, and Jake could see the corporate inspection vessel launching smaller attack craft. They were surrounded and outnumbered. "We need to move faster," Jake said. "Process dangerous if rushed," appeared on the screen. "Could kill family member." Jake felt torn between the need to escape and Frost's determination to save its enslaved relative. Through their connection, he could sense the other dragons growing freedom as Frost systematically disabled each neural inhibitor. Then Jake had an idea that came from his years of working with electronic systems. "What if I help? I understand how the inhibitors work. I've been inside them." Jake mind not compatible, appeared on the screen. "Maybe not directly," Jake said, "but you can translate for me. I'll tell you which system's a target, and you can focus the energy more precisely." Jake felt Frost's hesitation, then agreement. The neural connection between them deepened, and suddenly Jake was experiencing the electrical patterns inside the enslaved dragon's nervous system. It was overwhelming at first, like trying to read a schematic while someone was shooting at him. But Jake's engineering training took over. He began to identify the patterns that represented the neural inhibitors, guiding Frost's bioelectrical attacks to the most critical control nodes. Working together, they disabled the enslaved dragon's control systems in half the time it would have taken Frost alone. The freed dragon's joy was like an explosion of light in Jake's mind. The creature immediately turned on the remaining enslaved ships, using its weapons to disable rather than destroy them. Jake realized that the newly freed dragon was trying to help them rescue the others. "It's working," Jake said. "We can free them all." But their celebration was interrupted by a new threat. The corporate inspection vessel had launched something that Jake's enhanced senses identified as a massive electromagnetic pulse weapon. If it detonated near them, it would disable every biological system in the area, including Frost and the dragons they were trying to save. "We have to stop that weapon," Jake said. Frost was already moving, accelerating toward the corporate ship with their newly freed ally following close behind. But Jake could sense Frost's exhaustion through their connection. The surgery, the transformation, and the rescue efforts had drained the creature's energy reserves. "You're too weak," Jake said. "Let me help carry the load." Jake wasn't sure how he knew what to do, but the neural connection seemed to guide him. He began to channel his own bioelectrical energy into Frost's systems, using the human nervous system's electrical patterns to supplement the dragon's power. The sensation was indescribable. Jake felt his consciousness expanding to encompass both his human perspective and Frost's alien senses. He could perceive electromagnetic fields, gravitational currents, and energy patterns that no human had ever experienced. Together, they intercepted the electromagnetic pulse weapon just as it was preparing to detonate. Frost used its matter-to-energy conversion ability to simply absorb the weapon, converting its mass into pure power that recharged the dragon's depleted systems. The corporate inspection vessel tried to retreat, but it was too late. Jake and Frost were no longer just trying to escape. They were actively fighting back against the slavers who had tortured Frost's people. "Disable their engines," Jake said. "Don't hurt the crew, but make sure they can't follow us." Frost fired precisely targeted energy bursts that overloaded the ship's propulsion systems without breaching the hull. The corporate vessel went dead in space, its crew alive but stranded. Meanwhile, their freed ally had successfully liberated the second enslaved dragon, using the techniques Jake and Frost had developed. The newly freed creature immediately joined their efforts to rescue the third and final enslaved ship. But this last dragon was different. As they approached it, Jake could sense through the neural connection that its control systems were more advanced and deeply integrated. This creature had been enslaved for much longer, and its neural inhibitors had grown into its nervous system like cancer. "This one's like you were," Jake told Frost. "The inhibitors are fused with its spine. Cannot freeze safely in space. Appear on the screen. Need medical facility." Jake thought about the mining station they had just escaped from, but it was too dangerous to return there. The corporate inspection team would call for reinforcements by now. Then Jake remembered something from Frost's earlier drawings, the hidden sanctuary where free dragons lived. "Can we take it to your people? Do they have medical facilities?" "Yes," appeared on the screen, "but sanctuary is far. This dragon may not survive journey." Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. "Then we make a mobile medical facility. You have matter-to-energy conversion abilities. Can you create the equipment we need?" Through their neural connection, Jake began to share his knowledge of surgical procedures and medical equipment with Frost. The dragon's biomechanical abilities were far more advanced than anything humans had developed, and Jake realized they could literally grow the tools they needed from Frost's own body. Working together, they created a surgical suite inside Frost's hull, complete with biomechanical instruments designed specifically for dragon physiology. The other freed dragons helped by providing power and additional bioelectrical support for the complex procedure. The The surgery to free the third dragon took place in the depths of space, with Jake performing the delicate work, while Frost provided the necessary tools and energy. It was even more dangerous than the surgery Jake had performed on Frost, but this time he had help from creatures who understood their own biology better than any human ever could. When the final neural inhibitor was removed, all 4 dragons celebrated with a display of bioluminescent patterns that lit up the darkness of space like fireworks. Jake felt their joy and gratitude through the neural connections, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to belong to a family. "We did it," Jake said. "We freed them all." But Frost had one more surprise for him. As they began the journey toward the dragon's sanctuary, Frost shared a final revelation through their neural connection. The slavers who had been capturing and controlling the dragons were not working alone. They were part of a larger organization that was planning to use enslaved dragon ships to conquer other worlds. Earth was one of their targets. "They're going to attack my home world," Jake realized, "using ships made from your people." "Yes," appeared on the screen, "but now have warning. Have allies can fight back." Through the neural connection, Jake began to understand the full scope of what they had accomplished. By freeing these 3 dragons and proving that humans could be trusted allies, they had created a foundation for an interspecies alliance that could stand against the slavers. The journey to the dragon sanctuary took 3 days, during which Jake learned more about Frost people and their ancient civilization. The dragons have been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years, using their natural abilities to travel between stars and make contact with other intelligent species. But they had always been peaceful, never using their powers for conquest or domination. That peaceful nature had made them vulnerable to the slavers, who had been systematically hunting and capturing dragons for decades. When they finally arrived at the sanctuary, Jake was amazed by what he saw. It was a massive structure that looked like a living crystal, grown rather than built, floating in the depths of space far from any star system. Hundreds of dragons lived there in their natural forms, free to transform into ships when they chose to, but never forced to serve against their will. Jake became the first human ever to visit the sanctuary, and his presence caused quite a stir among the dragon community. But Frost vouched for him, sharing their experiences and the neural bond they had formed. The dragon elders listened to their story with growing concern and hope. Jake's actions had proven that humans could be trusted as allies, but the threat of the slavers remained. Working together, they began planning a counterattack that would free the remaining enslaved dragons and protect both Earth and the dragon homeworlds from future attacks. Jake found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the dragon civilization, a role he had never imagined but felt honored to accept. He would spend the rest of his life working to strengthen the alliance between their species, using his engineering skills to help develop new technologies that combine human innovation with dragon biomechanical abilities. The lonely mechanic who had found a wounded dragon in a canyon had become the bridge between 2 civilizations, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when someone chooses compassion over protocol and courage over safety.